Elise Thompson lived a simple, peaceful life in London. She worked hard and spoke with kindness, never seeking attention or trouble. She was proud of the work she did for the government, even if most people didn't know the details. She wasn't the type to boast, but she knew she made a difference in small, quiet ways. One rainy Thursday morning, Elise dressed in her navy suit, packed her small suitcase, and prepared for a trip to Manchester. She had just returned from a big meeting in the capital, and this was another part of her job: simple travel, routine work. Her life was filled with purpose, but always in the background, behind closed doors. As she walked to the airport, she felt calm. She didn't expect any problems. She wasn't worried about the flight or the work ahead. At the airport, she joined the line at security like everyone else. She shuffled her feet, staring at the ground, lost in her own thoughts, when something strange happened. A flight attendant whispered something to a guard who had been standing nearby. She didn't think much of it at first, but then the guard started to look her way. Elise felt a cold shiver of unease run through her. She had done nothing to stand out, nothing to make her a target, but still, something felt wrong. Moments later, 2 airport officers walked over to her. One of them, a tall man with short hair, looked at her with a serious expression. "Please come with us, ma'am," he said, his voice firm and professional. Elise was confused, but she didn't argue. She followed them, her mind racing. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew that arguing would only make it worse. The officers asked her to sit down and began checking her bags. Elise stayed quiet, watching them carefully as they rummaged through her things. The officers asked odd questions about her travels, her work, and her reason for flying. Elise answered them politely, but the questions felt invasive. She showed them her ID, her boarding pass, and her government work badge, hoping that would clear up any confusion. She explained that she had just returned from a government meeting in London and was on her way to another one in Manchester. Despite all her explanations, the officers didn't seem convinced. They asked her to wait while they made a phone call. Elise could feel her frustration building, but she kept her composure. She didn't want to make a scene. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling longer than the last. She watched the clock on the wall ticking away slowly. It was now over 20 minutes since they had pulled her aside. Elise had never been through something like this before. She wasn't used to being treated like she was doing something wrong, especially when she had done nothing but show up, like everyone else. The officers whispered to each other in the corner, glancing her way every now and then. Finally, the officer who had spoken to her earlier walked back over, his face unreadable. "You're cleared now," he said curtly. Elise nodded, not trusting herself to say anything. She wanted to ask why this had happened, what had caused this sudden suspicion, but she didn't. Instead, she just gathered her things and stood up. As she made her way to the gate, Elise's heart felt heavy. The air seemed thicker, and she felt like every pair of eyes in the room was on her. She had been treated differently, singled out in a way that made her feel small. She didn't understand why. She didn't know what had happened or why she had been chosen. Sitting on the plane, Elise stared out the window, her mind spinning. The noise of the passengers around her faded away, and all she could hear was the echo of the officer's words in her mind. "You're cleared now." She thought about the way they had looked at her, as if she didn't belong. They hadn't asked her who she was. They hadn't cared about her credentials or her past. They had only seen her skin, and that was enough to make them treat her like a threat. It stung, more than she was willing to admit to herself. Her fingers clenched around the armrest, but she didn't let herself cry. She couldn't, it wasn't worth it. Still, the pain was there, sitting quietly in her chest, and she couldn't shake it. She thought, they saw only my skin, not my name, not my work, not me. She had worked so hard to get to this place, to earn her position, to make a difference. And yet in that moment none of it mattered. They had only seen her as a stranger, as someone to fear, someone out of place. As the plane took off, Elise looked out at the clouds. The rain had stopped, but it didn't make her feel any lighter. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do with all the feelings rushing through her. The weight of the experience pressed down on her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt alone. But as the plane climbed higher into the sky, a quiet thought began to form in her mind. This wasn't the end of her story. She had been stopped. She had been judged. But she wasn't going to let that define her. She would find a way to rise above it, to make sure that no one else had to go through what she had. And maybe, just maybe, her journey wasn't about being the quiet one anymore. Maybe it was time to be heard. Elise was born in a small town near Birmingham, a place where the streets were narrow and the houses were old. It was a quiet town, where everyone knew everyone else's business, but not always in a good way. Elise's mother, Grace, worked 2 jobs to provide for them both. She didn't have much time for rest, but she always had a smile for her daughter. Life was never easy for them. Elise remembered the nights when the sounds of the world outside seemed far away, and the only sound she could hear was the quiet of their small apartment. They didn't have a lot of food some days, and the light in their flat flickered more often than it should have. But despite the hardships, there was always hope. Grace taught Elise that even when things felt tough, they could always find a way forward. Grace would tell her every night before bed, "You may be tired, love, but you're not broken." Elise would smile, even though she knew her mother was tired too. Grace didn't complain. She didn't ask for help. She just worked hard, doing whatever it took to keep them going. And Elise learned from her, not just how to work hard, but how to be strong even when life seemed unfair. School was tough for Elise. She wasn't the richest kid, and sometimes she felt different from the others. But she was smart, very smart. She studied every chance she got. Even when the other kids were playing outside, Elise had her nose buried in a book, learning about the world. She wanted to get out of that small town. She wanted more than the narrow streets and the old houses. She dreamed of a life where she could make a difference. When the time came, Elise applied for scholarships. She didn't think she had a chance, but she tried anyway. After all, what did she have to lose? And then, one day, she received a letter. She had been accepted into a university. It was a dream come true, and for the first time, Elise felt like maybe she wasn't just a small-town girl. She could do something big. She could prove that she had the strength to go far. University was hard, but Elise worked even harder. She didn't have the same advantages as some of the other students, but she made up for it with determination. She studied late into the night, asking for help when she needed it, and finding ways to push through the hardest parts. Her professors noticed her. They saw her drive, her willingness to work until she got it right. She didn't need to be the loudest person in the room to make an impact. She just needed to do her best. After university, Elise joined the military for a time. It was a way for her to serve her country and learn more about herself. The discipline and structure helped her grow. It was tough, but it taught her resilience. She learned to stand tall even when everything seemed to be pushing her down. When she left the military, she decided to work in government. It was a big job. Her role was important. She helped make sure companies followed the rules when they worked with public money. She helped create fairness in systems that weren't always fair. She didn't work in the spotlight. Most people didn't know what she did, but she knew, and that was enough. She knew she was making a difference, even if no one else saw it. Elise didn't brag about her job. She never told people about the tough decisions she had to make or the long hours she worked. She didn't need to. Her work spoke for itself. She made sure that businesses followed the law, that the money they took from the public was used properly. Her job was important, but it was also quiet. She worked behind the scenes, fixing problems before they could become big. That was the kind of person Elise was, quiet, focused, determined. She didn't want fame, she didn't need recognition, she just wanted to make things better. But then something unexpected happened. After the incident at the airport, Elise returned home and sat at her desk. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out the file she had kept on the airline that had flagged her. She knew it wasn't over. Yet, there had to be more to the story. She couldn't just forget about what had happened. Elise read the file slowly, carefully. She had been busy with work, and she hadn't had time to dig deeper before. But now, with the sting of the airport, experience still fresh in her mind, she paid close attention to the details. As she went through the records, she found things she had missed before. Small things, unfair things. The airline had been flagged multiple times for discriminatory practices, but nothing had been done about it. They had ignored complaints. They had paid people off to keep their problems quiet. Elise's heart sank. She had seen this before in other industries, but this was different. This time it was personal. That night, Elise couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of the airline, of the way she had been treated, but in the quiet of her apartment, her mother's words echoed in her mind. If someone shuts a door on you, find a window, and if there's no window, build one. Elise knew what she had to do. She couldn't just let this go. It wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness, about making sure no one else had to face what she had faced. With that thought in her mind, Elise sat up straight. She wasn't broken. She wasn't giving up. It was time to make things right. She had spent her life overcoming challenges, and this would be no different. She would find a way to make things change, and she wouldn't stop until she did. Her journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Elise sat quietly at her desk the next day, the file from the airline still open in front of her. The pages were filled with details, dates, and names. She had started a formal review of the airline's contract, and the deeper she dug, the more she realized how serious the situation was. She had expected some issues, but nothing on this scale. The airline had been flagged before, multiple times, for problems just like the one she had faced at the airport. Complaints were ignored. Reports were hidden. Every time something went wrong, the company just swept it under the rug. Elise knew that this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been treated unfairly, everyone who had been seen as a threat simply because of how they looked. She had worked with this company for a long time, but now it seemed like everything they had been told to do was a lie. Elise couldn't let that go. She had spent years in the government, holding companies accountable, making sure they did things the right way. This was no different. The airline's contract was huge, worth $540 million. That was a lot of money, and it wasn't just any money. It was taxpayer money, money that came from hard-working people. Elise knew how important it was to make sure that money was spent wisely. It wasn't just about following the rules. It was about fairness, about ensuring that people were treated equally, no matter who they were or where they came from. This wasn't just a job to her. It was personal. She pulled out another file and cross-checked the dates and names again. She had seen enough. There were clear patterns in how the airline operated. People like her, people who didn't fit a certain image, had been flagged more often than others. Their complaints were ignored, their concerns brushed aside, and the airline had continued to get away with it. Elise was quiet as she went through the files, her mind racing. She knew this would be a battle. There would be people who would try to protect the airline, people who didn't want to upset the status quo. But Elise had made a promise to herself years ago. She would never let something like this go unchecked. She wouldn't let the system silence the voices of those who needed help. When she felt she had enough evidence, Elise brought the matter to her manager, David. She walked into his office and sat across from him. She placed the file on his desk, the weight of everything inside it seeming to hang between them. "David, I've found something," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This is not just a mistake. It's not an isolated incident. The airline has been hiding complaints about their treatment of passengers. People like me have been flagged too often. Their records show a clear pattern." David looked at the file, his eyes scanning the pages quickly. He had known Elise for a long time and respected her work. She wasn't someone who made accusations without proof. As he read through the documents, his face grew more serious. "This is bad," he said after a moment. "If what you're saying is true, this is a violation of the rules. We can't just let this go." Elise nodded, feeling a sense of relief that David understood. She had expected pushback. This wasn't going to be easy. The airline was powerful. But David's trust in her meant more than anything else. "This is not only wrong," she said, her voice steady. "It's against our code. We can't let them get away with this." David looked at her for a long time before he spoke again. "Do what you need to do, Elise. We trust you." Those words gave her the confidence she needed. Elise didn't need permission to do what was right, but hearing David's support made her feel like she wasn't alone in this fight. She had always worked quietly, behind the scenes, making sure things ran smoothly. But now she knew it was time to take a stand. She couldn't ignore what she had found. She couldn't let this continue. Elise spent the next few days carefully documenting everything. She requested more records, gathered additional evidence, and prepared a formal report. It wasn't just about the airline anymore. It was about making sure they understood the consequences of their actions. She wasn't going to back down, no matter how difficult it got. She had faced challenges before, but this felt different. This was about fairness and doing the right thing, no matter what. When the day finally came to present her findings, Elise walked into the meeting with her head held high. The room was filled with people from different departments, all there to hear about the review she had conducted. Elise wasn't nervous. She knew the facts. She had done her research and she was ready. She stood before the group and began speaking. Her voice was clear, her words sharp. She explained what she had found, pointing out the hidden complaints, the ignored reports, the pattern of discrimination that had gone on for far too long. The room was silent as Elise went through each point, detailing the ways the airline had failed to meet the standards expected of them. As she finished, Elise looked around the room, meeting the eyes of everyone there. "We have a responsibility to make sure this doesn't continue," she said. "We can't let them continue to treat people unfairly, especially when they are trusted with taxpayer money." For a moment, no one said anything. Then one of the senior members of the department spoke up. "We'll need to investigate this further. It's a serious issue, and we'll need to make sure we have all the facts before we take action." Elise nodded, knowing this wasn't over yet. But she had taken the first step. She had made her voice heard, and she wouldn't stop until things were right. She had started something that couldn't be undone, and for the first time in a long while, Elise felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. Weeks passed, and the pressure on Elise grew, but she didn't let it shake her. She continued her work, gathering more evidence, meeting with her team, and preparing for the day she would present her findings to a small committee. The committee was important. These were the people who would decide the future of the airline's contract. Elise knew this was the moment that could change everything. On the day of the meeting, she stood in front of the committee, holding her notes in one hand, a steady calm in her voice. She had gathered facts, emails, dates, official records. Everything she had worked for was laid out clearly before them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm confidence spoke for itself. The committee listened, their faces serious as they followed her presentation. "Elise, what you found is concerning," one of the members said as she finished. "You've presented clear evidence that the airline failed to meet the standards we set for contractors, but this is a big decision." Elise nodded. She had expected this. She didn't rush her words. "I know. This isn't just about one person or one complaint. This is about fairness for everyone who depends on our system working properly. The airline has shown time and again that they have failed to meet these standards. This can't be allowed to continue." The room was quiet for a moment. Elise could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone, but she didn't waver. She had done everything she could. Now it was in their hands. The committee members whispered among themselves. Elise stood still, waiting. She trusted the facts. She trusted the process. She had given them all the information they needed. Then the chairperson of the committee stood up. "We have made our decision," she said. "We have reviewed the evidence, and based on what has been presented, we are freezing the airline's government contract." The words hung in the air. Elise felt a rush of emotions, but she kept her face neutral. She had known this was coming, but hearing it confirmed made her heart race. The airline would no longer have access to government flights or payments. The freeze would remain in place until they fixed their systems, until they proved they could treat everyone fairly. It wasn't a final decision. There would be more steps, more investigation, but it was a victory. A significant one. The room filled with murmurs as the committee began to discuss next steps. Elise quietly collected her notes. She had done what she set out to do, and now it was in the hands of the system to hold the airline accountable. News of the decision spread quickly. Headlines appeared all over the city. "Government freezes airline's multi-million contract." People began to talk about it everywhere. The same airline that had treated Elise with doubt, suspicion, and distrust had just lost one of their biggest deals. The public was shocked, but Elise wasn't surprised. She hadn't done this for revenge or recognition. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. Elise had been the one to stand up, the one to put the pieces together. But it wasn't her alone who made the change. She had used her position to make sure things were done right, to hold the airline accountable. She didn't shout. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't fight with the airline or anyone in the room. She just stood firm and did what was necessary. The next day, a journalist asked Elise how she felt about the decision. Standing in front of the reporter, Elise thought for a moment. She had expected this question. Everyone wanted to know how she felt, now that she had taken down such a big company. But she didn't want the story to be about her. She didn't want the focus to shift to her emotions. "I just wanted fairness," Elise said, her voice steady, but sincere. "Not just for me, but for everyone. People deserve to be treated with respect, no matter who they are." The journalist nodded, making notes, but Elise didn't wait for a follow-up. She had done her part. Now she would continue her work. There was more to be done, more fights to be fought, but in this moment she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had stood up for what was right. She had followed her mother's advice. If someone shuts a door on you, find a window. And when there was no window, she had built one herself. Her mother would be proud, Elise thought, as she left the office that day. The fight was far from over, but the world had just seen that one. Person, even quietly, could make a difference. It didn't take anger. It didn't take a loud voice. It took integrity, patience, and a willingness to do the right thing. And in that moment, Elise knew that the change she had sparked was only the beginning. The end months had passed since the decision that had changed everything for the airline. Elise had kept working quietly and diligently, knowing that the road ahead wasn't over. But as she walked through the airport once again, everything felt different. The same airport, the same staff, but this time there was a sense of change in the air. The last time she had been here, she had been treated like an outsider, a threat just because of the way she looked. But now the staff greeted her with smiles and nods. The security officers were more respectful, their eyes softer. The flight attendants moved around with a sense of care. It was clear to Elise that things had changed. The airline had taken steps to improve their systems, and it was not just about making sure passengers were treated better. It was about creating an environment where respect and fairness were at the forefront. Elise walked through the terminal, her head held high, but her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. She had always believed in fairness, in the idea that everyone should be treated with respect. She knew that one person speaking up could start a change, but now she was seeing the result. People were being treated better, and that made all the difference. As she settled into her seat on the plane, a young girl, probably around 10 years old, sat beside her. The girl looked at Elise with wide, curious eyes. For a moment she seemed hesitant, unsure if she should speak, but then she smiled and said, "I want to be like you one day." Elise blinked in surprise. The words were simple, but they hit her deeply. The girl's face was full of hope, a spark that reminded Elise of her younger self, the girl who had dreamt of doing something meaningful, of making a difference. Elise smiled back, a soft, warm smile. "You already can be," she said, her voice kind and gentle. "Just never forget who you are." The girl's smile grew wider, and Elise could see the small flicker of inspiration in her eyes. Elise didn't want fame. She didn't want people to remember her name for the wrong reasons. What mattered to her was that people were treated fairly, that they were seen and valued for who they were. That was what she had fought for, and that was what had made all the difference. As the plane took off, Elise looked out the window, feeling a quiet sense of peace. She knew that the fight for fairness was ongoing, that there would always be challenges ahead, but she also knew that one person's voice, one act of standing up for what was right, could create ripples that would be felt for years to come. She didn't need to be a hero. She just needed to be someone who did the right thing even when it was hard. For Elise, the change was never about fame or glory. It was about making the world a little better, one small act of fairness at a time. And as she sat on that plane, with the young girl beside her and the world moving on around her, she felt hopeful. Hopeful for the future, hopeful that the changes she had started would continue, and hopeful that others would follow her example. The end, that's all she had ever wanted. Fairness, the end.